Hi, welcome to the Dynamic Duel Podcast, a weekly show where we review superhero films and debate the superiority between Marvel and DC by comparing their characters in stat-based battle simulations. I'm Johnny DC.
And I'm his twin brother, Marvelous Joe.
And in this episode, we will be reviewing Batman Begins, the 2005 film directed by Christopher Nolan. I've been looking forward to reviewing this for like forever.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the best and one of the most influential superhero films ever made. At the time it came out, it was just so far beyond anything else that had been made. It was just shameful. Like, it came out the same year that Fantastic Four came out, and I was just like, God damn it. But luckily, since Batman Begins came out, Marvel has kind of, stepped up their game as well. So,
no, yeah, in my opinion, this is the film that sort of made the superhero genre viable.
Yeah, definitely.
But before we get into our review, we're going to break down the movie news items from the past week, of which there was only one big news item, and it's that Sam Raimi has confirmed that he's working on the Doctor Strange sequel.
Yeah, almost definitely he's going to direct it, which is huge news.
Yeah, for sure. As always, our segment times are in our episode description, so if you want to listen to that or jump to the review, just look in our show notes.
I'm really glad that we have a topic to discuss that does not revolve around the coronavirus.
Right? I mean, yeah, there were some news items like San Diego Comic-Con getting canceled, but I don't even want to talk about that.
Yeah,
let's not talk about the bad news. Yeah, it's canceled. Next.
As always, guys, please don't forget to share the show with your friends or family. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe to us if you haven't yet. And if you can, please rate us or review us on the platform that you're listening to us on. That includes you guys on Podbean and Stitcher and iTunes and CastBox. Please let others know what you think about the show and help us grow our audience. It means a whole lot to us.
We want to give a quick shout out to Harrison Fox. He's the winner of last week's contest, where we gave away the 4-issue miniseries JLA/Avengers. Congrats to you.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone who entered. With that out of the way,
quick to the No Prize.
A No Prize is an award Marvel used to give out up until the 90s to fans. Our version, the Dynamic Duel No Prize, is a digital award that we post on social media that Jonathan draws for those who we feel gave the best answer to our question of the week. Last week's question was in regards to our discussion about what Zack Snyder's DCEU vision would have been had he not been replaced on the Justice League film. And we asked, would you like to see Zack Snyder return to direct a DC film? And if so, which one? Got a lot of great answers for this one. Let's go ahead and run down the honorable mentions.
Our first honorable mention goes to Michael Haggerty, who said that yes, he would like to see Zack Snyder return to direct a Dr. Fate or a Super Pets film because of his success directing the animated Legends of the Guardians, the Owls of Ga'Hoole movie. And they actually are making a Super Pets film. I would love for him to direct.
I think it'd be cool to see him direct a Dr. Fate film, just kind of like bring the same visual aesthetic that he brought to 300 and just apply it to like ancient Egypt and like all the mysticism around that. I think that would be pretty cool.
Well, we know Dr. Fate is going to be in the Black Adam movie, so it might be too late for that.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Bob Ramirez also gets honorable mention for saying that yes, Zack Snyder should return to direct a DC film and complete his planned story arc, saying that it was a tragedy what happened and that his films were a comic book movie renaissance. And I just have to agree with all of that. I would have loved to have seen Zack Snyder get to finish his story.
Son of Farhomand said that maybe Zack Snyder should return to direct, depending on how the Snyder Cut performs with fans. Now, the rumor is that the Snyder Cut version of the Justice League is going to be appearing on HBO Max when that platform releases. It's just a rumor, it's possible, but Son of Farhomand is definitely playing it rational and safe by saying, maybe I should see how this movie turns out before I answer this question.
Miggy Madangian said that yes, Zack Snyder should return to direct a Red Hood film because the tone and style would be a perfect fit. And I agree with that as well. The Red Hood is such a dark character. And, everyone complains that Zack Snyder's tone is too dark, having characters like Batman kill. Well, guess what? Red Hood kills. So, yeah, it is a perfect fit.
Yeah, it would be cool if it was a direct adaptation of the animated Under the Red Hood film.
Oh, yeah, that'd be really cool. Oh, I'd love to see that so much.
JP Lunai said that yes, Zack Snyder should return to direct a Green Lantern Corps movie so that he could set up the cosmic side of the DCEU.
And he's so great with special effects. If anyone did a Green Lantern Corps movie justice, I think it would be him.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of directors that work well with special effects, but Zack Snyder is such a versatile filmmaker, I think he could totally do a great job with Green Lantern.
Honorable mention also goes to Richard McGrew, who said that yes, Zack Snyder should return to direct Justice League Dark. because he could see his unique style in a different type of superhero film that's more magic-based and darker. And I agree, that would be fantastic. They tried developing a Justice League Dark film a few years back, but now we recently learned that J.J. Abrams will be doing a Justice League Dark television series for HBO Max.
Dustin Balcom also said that Zack Snyder should return to direct Justice League Dark, although he said that the movie should be called Constantine and the House of Mystery or something like that, just to get him away from the Justice League name brand, which may leave, a bad taste in some people's mouths.
And our final honorable mention goes to Sir Patrick Hindsight, who said that no, he doesn't want to see Zack Snyder return because he doesn't like Snyder's character development, and he doesn't like the fact that he established a dark Superman and a Bat murderer in the DCEU.
Finally, somebody said it.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that he was the only one. I thought we would get a lot more no answers.
It turns out there's a lot of Zack Snyder fans out there.
Including the winners of this week's No Prize, who are Jacob Bell and Jeff Miles Jr., who both said that yes, Zack Snyder should return to direct Flashpoint. And I am all for this, because not only is it like a dark version of the Justice League, but he handpicked the actors who would play a central role in the film, namely Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Flash, and Thomas Wayne, who is Batman in that storyline.
Yeah, and Jeffrey Dean Morgan was the one who played Thomas Wayne in the BVS film. He would be amazing in that role. He really would.
Not only that, but I just want to see that film in general because it would reboot DC continuity, allowing you to sort of start fresh with the DC Comics franchise.
Yeah, Jeff also said that he'd be interested in seeing Justice League sequels that have the tyrannical Earth 50 Justice League counterparts as the villains. I think the Justice League from Earth 3 is also evil. So just basically like an evil version of the Justice League against the regular Justice League, and I think that would satisfy both fans of Zack Snyder's Dark Vision and fans of the lighter side of the characters, and you could just kind of like see them clash against each other in one movie.
Yeah, they would be foils for one another, so you'd get a greater emphasis of darkness and lightness. It could totally work.
Yeah.
But congrats once again to Jacob Bell and Jeff Miles Jr. You guys get this week's No Prize. If you, the listener, want to win your own No Prize, listen on to later on in the episode when we ask another question of the week.
And now that that's done,
on to the news.
So last week, Sam Raimi had an interview with ComingSoon.net in which he confirmed that he was working on the Doctor Strange sequel called Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Now, it wasn't 100% confirmed that he will be directing, but that's the rumor. That's been going around for about a month now, that Sam Raimi will be directing.
He strikes me as a big fan of Doctor Strange, so I wouldn't be surprised if he was directing.
Yeah, I mean, he said in the interview that Doctor Strange was like his fifth favorite character, which isn't great. Spider-Man was his first. I guess Batman is his second. But he was a huge fan of the Lee Ditko era of comics in the 60s. That was his favorite version of Spider-Man, and that's the era from which Doctor Strange came from, the Silver Age. And so there's a lot of heavy Ditko elements that carried forward through the years for both of those characters. And given Sam Raimi's horror film background, I think he'd be absolutely perfect for the Doctor Strange sequel, and I really couldn't be more excited about this news. It's like he was born to direct this movie.
I mean, you also said that about Scott Derrickson, though.
That's true. Scott Derrickson, he's also a great horror film director, but his horror films are not nearly as fun as Sam Raimi's horror films. Sam Raimi did the Evil Dead movies, he did Drag Me to Hell, he did Army of Darkness, and even films like the original Spider-Man trilogy and Oz the Great and Powerful, those films had a lot of horror elements in them. He's really great at creating horror movies that aren't horror movies, which is exactly what I think Multiverse of Madness needs to be. Scott Derrickson, I think, would have brought maybe too dark or too serious an edge to the horror elements, whereas I think Sam Raimi will have a little bit more fun with it. Do you remember the hospital scene from Spider-Man 2? We did review that film with Maggie Hart, and I remember talking about just how insanely crazy it was and how horrific it was when Dr. Octopus's arms first came to life.
Right, yeah, it was so pulpy and spooky and kind of borderline hilarious at the same time.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I want this multiversal movie to feel like, honestly. Just really trippy and out there and fun in the way that those early Lee and Ditko comic books were. Just really psychedelic. I mean, I still appreciate what Scott Derrickson did, and I'm glad he's still sticking around as a producer, but Derrickson's vision was so heavily influenced by Christopher Nolan's Inception film and Batman Begins, it didn't quite have enough to say on its own, I think. And in that regard, it felt very formulaic and a little bit of been there, done that, you know what I mean? I think Sam Raimi will bring a more true original tone to the MCU that's not currently there.
Yeah, I would say that as a director, Sam Raimi probably has a stronger voice than Scott Derrickson does. He has more of a signature style that's sort of all of his own.
Yeah, here's hoping that the movie goes into pre-production soon here. It does come out late next year, November 5th, 2021. It recently got pushed back due to the coronavirus outbreak to November, which was around the same time frame that the original movie was released, and it was a huge success. So it should do even better numbers when the sequel comes out then.
Yeah, and considering the director switch, it's kind of nice that it has that extra time for pre-production.
And it's nice to see a director that all the fans appreciated. This guy did essentially invent the modern superhero film with the first Spider-Man movie. It's nice to see him come back and tackle it again, and that brings us to our question of the week.
Which past Marvel or DC film director, besides Zack Snyder, would you like to see come back to direct another superhero film? And which one?
Post your answer to our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or email us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com. We'll pick our favorite answer and draw that person a Dynamic Duel No Prize that we'll post to social media. But I think that does it for all the news for this episode. Again, in these times, news is hard to come by, but it was really nice to get that little tidbit about Sam Raimi. So with that done, let's go ahead and get into the main event of this episode, where we review the groundbreaking Christopher Nolan film, Batman Begins.
Okay, so Batman Begins. It came out in 2005, which was 8 years after the previous Batman film, Batman and Robin, which of course was a critical and somewhat commercial failure. This film was pretty influential on the superhero genre, though maybe not as much as its sequel, 2008's The Dark Knight, which we argued transcended the superhero genre in our review of that film. Like that review, and like all of our reviews, we'll be getting into heavy spoilers as we discuss this film. So make sure you've either seen it or are okay with spoiling one of the greatest superhero movies ever made for yourself.
Which you shouldn't be.
Yeah. I personally recommend 100% that you watch the film if you haven't already. Actually, even if you've already watched it, watch it again. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it really holds up in a way that many of those early 2000s superhero films don't.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's very true. Now, if you've listened to our podcast for a while, especially if you've listened to our very first episode, you'd know that I, Johnny DC, grew up a Marvel fan. I didn't really become aware of the DC Comics universe until I started reading their comics in the late 90s, and I became a pretty hardcore fan in the early 2000s when I was old enough to start buying the comics for myself. Batman Begins was the first live-action Batman film to come out since I'd become a DC Comics fan, unless you count Halle Berry's Catwoman, which I don't.
I do. I count that one.
No, you don't.
That's
no
totally
one does.
a DC film.
Prior to Batman Begins, my favorite Batman film was Tim Burton's 1989 Batman film, and in my opinion, its sequels got progressively worse. Batman Returns, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, they all took place in this overly stylized, peculiar world that I didn't recognize when I started reading Batman comics. The Gotham City I read about and loved was much less flamboyant and much more noir. So I was beyond ecstatic when the news first came out that Christopher Nolan would be directing the new Batman film.
Oh yeah, Christopher Nolan's fantastic. He directed one of my favorite films of all time, Memento. I think that was the very first film that I saw of his. And then I went on to see Insomnia with Al Pacino, and that was okay. But really, you could tell even back then with those early films of his that he was a director to watch out for, that he was going to be huge, that he had such brilliant ideas behind the camera.
Oh yeah. I mean, he wrote and directed Memento, which was this neo-noir psychological thriller that came out in the year 2000. And for many years, I was just obsessed with how good that film was. I think it's fair to say that Christopher Nolan is a master of his craft and is arguably the best director of today. Now, by the time Batman Begins came out, studios had seen success with Spider-Man and the X-Men films, and not much else superhero-wise. A lot of superhero films that came out in the early mid-aughts, like Elektra or Fantastic Four, which both of those came out in 2005, didn't take themselves too seriously. So it was pretty novel how Christopher Nolan approached the setting of Gotham City in a real-world context, which brought a more serious tone to the film. And in this mundane Gotham City, as opposed to like Burton's or Schumacher's vision, the character of Batman had a chance to stand out and be more interesting than he'd ever been on screen. In the past, Batman always had to compete with the world around him and his villains, but under Christopher Nolan, Batman truly was the star of the show.
Yeah, Nolan really approached the character seriously. He took the material seriously, which we had seen in superhero films before this, but Nolan was the first to approach it from a grounded, real-world standpoint, as opposed to a fantastical one. Overall, I think as fans, we were excited for this movie when it first came out, but I hope that a lot of people that weren't fans of the character, that were used to the character solely from the Burton films and the Schumacher films and even the Adam West television show, I hope they were really pleasantly surprised by Nolan's vision and the tone of this film and the intelligence of the story, because that's really what comic book fans have been expecting all along.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This at the time was the closest thing to the comics we'd ever received for the character of Batman. So yeah, I definitely hope and I do truly believe that this film created quite a few Batman fans. Prior to this, the only other superhero film to take the real-world context approach that I can think of is Blade. But that film shared a writer with Batman Begins in David S. Goyer, who would take the same approach almost a decade later with Superman when he also wrote Man of Steel. Goyer really helped shape the story arc of the Dark Knight trilogy, and Christopher Nolan and his brother Jonathan did a fantastic job of taking care of the details and hammering home the themes. The biggest theme in Batman Begins, of course, is fear. Batman and all of the major villains utilize fear in some way, and speaking of which, it's pretty interesting to see how many villains there are in this film. You have Ra's, Scarecrow, Falcone. Most superhero films have one major antagonist, and in past Batman films, having more than one villain tended to leave less screen time for Batman. This film doesn't run into that problem, because it utilizes four-corner opposition really well. Four-corner opposition is a story technique used by writers to maintain a progression of conflict, and in this film, the conflict revolves around using fear. In one corner, you have Batman, who wants to use fear against criminals for the betterment of mankind. He's in direct conflict with Falcone, who wants to use fear against Gotham's citizens for selfish purposes. In another corner, you have Ra's al Ghul, who also wants to better mankind, but by using fear against ordinary citizens. And lastly, you have Scarecrow, Raz's pawn, who uses fear as a weapon against Falcone and the Arkham Asylum criminal element to keep them under control for money and a sense of power. The conflict is so well utilized that even though you don't know who the primary antagonist is for half the movie, like who Batman will fight in the climax of the film, it doesn't matter, because there's still something for Batman to overcome. He's continuously encountering conflict. And the major benefit of four-corner opposition is that it fleshes out the villains, too, because they have conflict outside of dealing with the main hero. Like, Ra's thinks Scarecrow is petty, Scarecrow thinks Falcone is stupid, and Falcone is afraid of Ra's. They have minor roles compared to Bruce Wayne, but they're still integral to the story.
Each of the three villains seem to be on different tiers in terms of their threat level. You had your minor threat, Falcone, whom Batman was able to deal with easily. You had Scarecrow, who initially gave Batman problems, but then was also handled fairly easily. And then you have Ra's al Ghul, who was the most difficult to handle.
Right, exactly. You had this escalating conflict.
It was really used great in a film that dealt with the building and development of this hero.
Exactly. And that was not the only four-corner opposition in this film, because while fear is a primary theme, you also have a secondary theme in identity, which makes sense because, again, this is an origin film where Bruce Wayne tries to figure out who he is. As a comic fan, one of the biggest draws to this film was that we were going to witness a story that we had never really seen in comics or movies before, namely how Bruce Wayne became Batman. This film borrowed elements from comics like Frank Miller's Year One story and Dennis O'Neill's The Man Who Falls, but those storylines only offered Bruce Wayne's story after he returned to Gotham from his training abroad, and only glimpses toward that actual training. This film's story really gets to the heart of why someone would take up the symbol of a bat and choose to inspire fear. Bruce wants to keep the memory of his parents alive to inspire and save Gotham like how his parents tried to. In direct opposition to that, you have Mr. Earl, who's trying to forget and erase the Waynes and what they stood for.
Yeah, within Wayne Enterprises.
Bruce also runs into conflict with Alfred, who chastises Bruce for sacrificing his family's legacy for the sake of his grief, and later, his Batman persona. Rachel, similarly, is critical of her old friend's new demeanor, though she's in the dark as to Bruce Wayne's true identity. The writing in this film is its strongest component, more so than the cinematography or score, which were also both really strong. That said, the writing isn't perfect, and the film sacrifices some of its serious tone for some really groan-worthy jokes. Like, I hope you're not a member of the fire brigade, and at least tell me what it looks like. Vroom. Never mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I really can't believe how much bathos was in this movie, man. What was up with all the bathos? Why does it have to be so bathotic?
No, I thought the same thing when I was watching it again last night.
Yeah, when Falcone's like, who the hell is that? And then Batman picks him up out of the car and says, I'm Batman. And then he just has to ruin the moment by looking over to the homeless guy and saying, nice coat. I mean, what was the homeless guy even doing there? What was he doing this entire time that Batman was beating the shit out of all these guys?
Exactly.
He was just watching the show, essentially.
Pretty much. Like, why didn't they cut that? They should have just cut that.
Yeah. For some reason, every time I saw one of those corny jokes in this movie, because it's not a corny movie, but it definitely has some cheesy moments. It just reeks of studio interference, I think. They're like, you're making this awesome, dark, noirish Batman film, but you got to keep it light for the kids, something like that. It totally did not have Goyer or either of the Nolans written on it at all.
I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, knowing how much Warner Brothers gets involved in their films. And considering that, this is one of their biggest properties with a sort of untested director in Christopher Nolan at the time.
And an untested approach. A superhero movie like this had never really been made before. So I'm sure that they were really concerned about the darkness of it all, wondering if it could be marketed to all moviegoers.
Yeah. A lot of these one-liners didn't need to be in there, and they really take you out of the moment. Like, there's also some dialogue that's meant to be on theme that's a bit of a stretch. Like, they wanted the character to use the word fear in that scene somehow. Like, this is a world you'll never understand, and you always fear what you don't understand. Or like I learned the fear before a crime and the thrill of success. People don't really talk that way.
No. Fear is by far the most used word in this movie, and I gotta say, you could have cut that down by half and still really hammered home the themes.
Yeah, kind of treat your audience with a little bit more respect, like they're a little bit more intelligent than having to constantly hammer the theme on them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm being nitpicky, but it was something I noticed even during my very first time watching the film in theaters. That said, for every nice car, there's a theatricality and deception are powerful agents type quote that really resonates. This film is loaded with great quotes. But the film also suffers from unintelligible fight choreography. Not all of the action is bad, like the sword fighting scenes in the first act and the tumbler chase scene were awesome, but the quick editing and lack of continuity in the fight scenes are pretty frustrating, honestly, to watch. Like, if I was the fight choreographer, I'd be pretty pissed at how those scenes were edited.
Yeah, it was really a weakness of Nolan's at this point in his career, having never really done an action movie before. I think he took notes on this criticism, though, because the action in the Dark Knight movie and Dark Knight Rises, and especially Inception, those were all fantastic. But this movie was so frustrating to watch because you just really wanted to see Batman in action, and you really couldn't.
I feel like it was a good idea of Nolan's at the time, but upon execution, it just fell apart.
Yeah, the idea being that Batman is such an effective, efficient, and stealthy fighter that you don't really see where he's coming from when he attacks you and stuff like that. But you're right, what sounds good in concept doesn't always work in reality.
Aside from those fight scenes, though, the film's editing and plot structure in general is like a masterclass in how to flawlessly incorporate flashbacks into your story. The way the film weaves through time through the first act is pretty impressive. Like, you never get lost and you're continuously invested because you're constantly learning new things. It's so efficient at delivering exposition, no scene and almost no line is wasted.
Yeah, the transitional dialogue from the present to the past was just seamless. It really led the audience into the next scene so that they would know what to expect. They would know where they were in the story.
One final gripe I'd have with the film is that while overall the cast was terrific, some individual performances weren't as strong as others. But let's get into those in the character.
Katie Holmes is bad.
Yeah, dude, I'll get into it in the character breakdown. Let's start things with Bruce Wayne / Batman. Now, I feel like the internet cast Christian Bale for this role. Before this film came out, like whenever people talked online about who should play Batman, I always saw Christian Bale's name come up. And I wasn't too familiar with his work prior to this film, but I've since seen films like American Psycho and Equilibrium, and he's fantastically both dark and dramatic in those roles. I think it'd be hard to argue that he is the best actor to ever take up the role of Batman.
Definitely the best actor. I mean, not my personal favorite in the role, but certainly the most skilled.
Yeah, same for me. My favorite Batman is still Ben Affleck, I would say.
Because his was even truer to the comics.
Right. From like the costume to like the warehouse scene, absolutely more true to the comics.
But Christian Bale was perfect for Nolan's particular vision.
I'd agree. Yeah, definitely. Now, Bruce Wayne's arc in the film can pretty much be summarized by the lesson his father teaches early in the film. Why do we fall? So we can learn to pick ourselves up. Learning what it means to pick yourself up after your parents are needlessly gunned down in front of you is what this film is all about. Bruce eventually overcomes fear and hardship and channels both through Batman. He makes mistakes, he gets lost, bad things happen, but Bruce learns and gets back up. He doesn't get gassed by the Scarecrow the second time he encounters him, and he doesn't save Roz that second time either.
Which is kind of like murder, if you think about it. Honestly, like all these films are #BatMurderer, if you think about it. It didn't start with Ben Affleck's Batman.
It's like the train track thought experiment. Like if you see a train heading towards a group of people, do you flip a switch so that it hits one person instead? Or do you just do nothing and not save them? Batman chose at the end to simply not save the bad guy.
Like that's a fallacy, because in the train thought experiment, someone has to die. In this movie, Roz didn't have to die. And in the comics, Batman would have saved him.
Shut up. How dare you criticize Christopher Nolan's work? Well, he learned that he was wrong even then in The Dark Knight, I guess you could argue, because he saves the Joker from falling.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So there you go. Batman learns. Now, I know you're not a fan of the costume, particularly the cowl, but honestly, I prefer the ears to be at the back of the head instead of on the sides. So like less Jim Lee and more Michael Turner.
Mm-hmm.
I love that they explained the function of the ears, which were to house the long-range microphones for surveillance. I love the explanation for the gauntlets, the cape, and everything. It's a terrific costume, in my opinion.
Yeah, every element of the costume was rationalized, which I was a huge fan of. I mean, there was nothing superfluous or too fantastical. All of his costume decisions were all very prudent because honestly, the film knows that a guy who dresses up as a bat has issues. They say that line almost exactly. So in order to make the costume make sense, the film had to rationalize the bat suit.
One final thing about Bruce Wayne is that I loved how this film made him out to be like a bumbling billionaire when he returned to Gotham. Like that was something that the other films really didn't explore. Like no one's supposed to suspect Bruce Wayne of being Batman because he's just too full of himself and narcissistic. He wouldn't care about saving anyone else. So that when Bruce says someone who dresses like a bat clearly has issues, it was spot on in terms of characterization, in terms of how Bruce Wayne had become his mask.
Yeah, I love how at the end of the movie, the headline read, "Drunk billionaire burns down home."
Yeah, that was great. That was hilarious. So the next character I want to talk about is Henry Ducard / Ra's al Ghul, played by Liam Neeson. Now, Liam Neeson starts the film off as Henry Ducard, though they never mention his first name as Henry. I think they just call him Ducard. Now, in the comics, Ducard was a French mercenary who trained Bruce Wayne in the Man Who Falls storyline. The twist that Ducard was Ra's al Ghul was a clever way to approach the character's immortality from the comics. It tied nicely into the whole theatricality and deception lesson that Ducard taught Batman.
Yeah, because in the comics, Ra's al Ghul is essentially immortal. He can keep coming back to life through his use of the Lazarus pits, which are like these underground pools with healing waters or something like that. But in seeing the twist, It kind of makes you wonder if these films rationalize the mythology of Batman a little bit too much, because I would have actually liked to have seen the Lazarus Pits in these films.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I hands down would have loved to have seen some of the more fantastical elements from the comics, like a Lazarus Pit, make an appearance in Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. It is, in a way, one of the drawbacks of the hyper-real approach, and it's not like it's something that Marvel has an issue with, They're not afraid of their more fantastical elements. So I think you could still get away with something like a Lazarus Pit in a Batman film. They sort of explored the Lazarus Pit or Christopher Nolan's version of it in The Dark Knight Rises. It's the pit that he's trapped in that he emerges from.
Oh, yeah.
But it's very different from the comics. They changed the League of Assassins to be the League of Shadows for this film, which I actually think is a cooler name, and their mission isn't too different. It's essentially genocide, though in the comics, Ra's is more of an eco-terrorist who wants to bring balance to both mankind and nature. I think Liam Neeson did a great job in the role. He did a fantastic job portraying both the anger and the air of superiority that the character is known for.
Absolutely. He nailed this role, and he was just so cool. Like, I had never really thought of Liam Neeson as this cool badass prior to this movie. And then after this, he got roles like Taken and The Grey and all these other action films, and he became a viable action star through this film, and one of the coolest of our time.
Now, originally, Gary Oldman was cast as Ra's al Ghul.
Really?
Yeah, Chris Cooper was Nolan's first choice to play Commissioner Gordon, but when Cooper turned down the role, Christopher Nolan decided to cast Gary Oldman as Gordon, knowing that it would be kind of interesting to see Oldman as a good guy, because in most films he had played a bad guy.
Yeah, that's kind of what he was known for, huh? But Gary Oldman did such a great job in this movie. His Commissioner Gordon was just so down-to-earth and genuine, authentic in his goodness. It really makes you want to see Gary Oldman in more good guy type roles.
Oh yeah, in my opinion, Gary Oldman was born for the role of Commissioner Gordon. His story was largely influenced by the Batman Year One story, which introduced characters like the corrupt police detective Flass, who's essentially a foil for Jim. Jim's backstory is only hinted at in this film, but we learn enough about him to understand why Batman would want him as an ally, and he proves to be a strong one. Like, he's the one who fires the missile at the climax to really save Gotham City.
Yeah, they're definitely a duo.
Moving on to Dr. Jonathan Crane, aka the Scarecrow, Cillian Murphy was almost cast as Bruce Wayne in this film. Now, he lost the role to Christian Bale, but Christopher Nolan liked him so much that he cast him as Dr. Jonathan Crane. I'm still not quite sold as to whether that was a good idea. Like, Cillian is a really good actor, but I think he's too much of a pretty boy to pull off the Jonathan Crane from the comics, who's supposed to be kind of awkward looking. Like, Cillian's performance was awkward, maybe a little too technical, and that you could tell it was a performance, primarily in his voice.
I liked that, though. I don't mind a good technical performance if it's done by someone who really knows what they're doing and is doing it well. I do think that Cillian Murphy does have a unique appearance to him. His facial structure is almost skeletal, and I really like his delivery.
I mean, his delivery was great, and his look was cool. Like, it makes more sense for the character, a doctor, to wear a suit and a makeshift mask than for him to change into, like, a full-blown scarecrow costume with straw sticking out. I mean, his fear toxin would make him look scary no matter what he wore. And it was actually Cillian's idea to tone down the look of the character for this film.
Oh, really? That mask, man, that mask is so awesome.
Like a Leatherface kind of mask, just made out of sackcloth.
Yeah. And to see the character fully realized at the end when he's riding the horse, it felt very like Headless Horseman-y to me, like something from Sleepy Hollow. It was amazing.
Moving on to Rachel Dawes, played by Katie Holmes. Rachel was an original character created for this film. She sort of acts like Bruce's moral conscience and has a much more mature view of justice than him early on. Like, she sees the bigger picture that Bruce can't. And she's integral not only for Bruce to understand the difference between justice and vengeance, but she also really effectively shifts Bruce's conflict toward Falcone, making him one of the film's main antagonists.
It's a great role. It really is a fantastic role that's extremely well written.
Oh, yeah.
And is essential to the development of the hero. But it's portrayed by one of the worst actresses you could have possibly gotten for the role.
I mean, some would argue that Katie Holmes' performance was the weakest link in this film, and there are definitely some scenes where I'd probably agree. But, I mean, then there are others, like in the car after Joe Chill was killed, or when she's talking with Dr. Crane at Arkham, that I think she did a terrific job in the role, and I would have loved to have seen her return for the sequel. I think her death in the sequel would have had much more weight if she had returned to the role.
That's probably true. I do think that Maggie Gyllenhaal is a much better actress, though. The scenes that you're referring to where Katie Holmes is doing a good job, did she also have a permanent smirk on her face while she was delivering these lines? The answer is yes.
No, she
always has this smirk on her face, no matter what she's doing or saying.
I do agree that sometimes she does have a smirk when it's not appropriate, like when she delivers the line, "What do you mean?" I'm like, what? Why are you all of a sudden smirking?
And she's always like glaring too. Just this perma-glare, perma-smirk thing that it drives me crazy, honestly.
I really noticed it in the final scene when she's talking to Bruce in the rubble of Wayne Manor. The glare. Like, I'm like, where are you looking? What are you looking at? Are you looking at Christian Bale's, like, hairline? Focus on him. I don't know what was going on.
I mean, I've seen her in other movies that I really liked her in, but I don't think that she fit the tone of this movie. I think she was just cast at the time because she was kind of like the it girl and she was attractive, but she really wasn't up to the standards of the rest of this cast, I think.
I don't want to be too harsh because, again, I do like the character of Rachel, and I don't think Katie Holmes did that bad. I mean, Rachel in this film is a damsel. She does need to be rescued several times. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but, you know, she does carry her own, like, feisty authority around as a district attorney.
Part of me wishes they just started out with Maggie Gyllenhaal in the series.
That probably would have worked out terrific. Moving on to Carmine Falcone. Tom Wilkinson as Carmine Falcone is another performance I have mixed feelings about. Like, I think it's appropriately smarmy, for sure, but he never quite sold me on how scary he kept saying he was. Like, he was intimidating, sure, for one scene, but after that, like, not so much.
I mean, Tom Wilkinson looks like just such a nice guy, you know? It's really hard to buy him as this, like, insanely brutal mob boss, you know? I think John Turturro, who's cast in the upcoming Matt Reeves Batman film as Carmine Falcone, will do a kind of a better job of selling the more evil aspects of the character.
Oh, yeah, both the smarminess and the violentness, I think.
Yeah.
So Lucius Fox is played by Morgan Freeman. Now, incorporating Lucius Fox, one of the lesser-known characters of the Batman mythos, into Batman's origin as his gadget developer was a stroke of genius. Like, prior to this film, Lucius in the comics was just a business manager who ran Wayne Enterprises for Bruce Wayne. But this film reinvented him to be like Q from the James Bond films.
Yeah, it really allowed Batman to focus more on the physical training aspect of his character development and let, you know, like the technology stuff fall to another person, just so it's a little bit more believable and something that you don't really have to address as much.
Exactly. Lucius Fox is like the literal answer to where does he get those wonderful toys? And it seems so integral to Batman's world now that it'll feel weird to see future Batman films without him. Like in the upcoming Matt Reeves films. Like, who designed Batman's gear? Did Bruce do it himself? Like, that's dumb. His company has an R&D department. Lucius Fox's role in the Nolan films just makes sense. Morgan Freeman's performance brought some well-placed levity to the film. I doubt he put much effort into the role. He's essentially just playing Morgan Freeman, but he's so charismatic and has so much character that it just turned out perfect. Lastly, I want to talk about Alfred Pennyworth, played by Michael Caine. There has never been, and there will probably never be, a better Alfred than Michael Caine's. He brings so much heart and optimism to the role that when he gets angry at or worried for Bruce, so does the audience. Like, he cares for Bruce and his parents. He's the caretaker of not just Bruce, but of the Wayne legacy. And he's there to remind Bruce how important that legacy is several times in the film.
I think he also brings some solid levity to the proceedings, not counting like the jokey one-liners, but just by his presence. It kind of lightens the mood.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, he supports Bruce, knowing what he's been through, but also keeps him in check when he needs to. The line in the first act when he says, "I won't presume to tell you what to do with your past. Just know that there are those of us who care what you do with your future." I think that sums him up perfectly. Like, he's Bruce's surrogate father, and he's the one who reminds Bruce, after the League of Shadows reemerges and burns down Wayne Manor, that the Wayne legacy is more than just bricks and mortar, and that they fall in order to learn to pick themselves up.
I think his most important line in the movie was, "What's the point of all those push-ups if you can't lift a bloody log?"
That was a great one-liner. That was fantastic. So let's get into the plot breakdown. The film starts off with a young Bruce falling down a well, and he's traumatized after a swarm of bats attack him. And I thought that was a great start. That's from the comic storyline, The Man Who Falls as well.
You know, setting up the theme of fear from the first scene in the film, the way the story weaves its own themes into the existing mythology was just really perfect.
Yeah, the scene of him falling in the well is pretty powerful. It's sort of like him and Rachel in the garden, and he loses his innocence. It's kind of like the Garden of Eden. There's like an archetype to this story, to this origin. But after that, we flash forward to Bruce Wayne as an adult, and he's held within a Chinese prison where he meets Henry Deckard. Deckard invites Bruce into the League of Shadows, and he delivers this great line where he tells Bruce, like, if you make yourself more than just a man, if you devote yourself to an ideal entirely, you become a legend. I love that line.
Everything that comes out of Liam Neeson's mouth is just pure gold.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I also think that's sort of what sets DC's heroes apart from, say, Marvel's, is that the DC heroes are these grand symbols, these grand archetypes, these legends. And this is sort of like the start of that. He's becoming more
Marvel
than...
heroes are totally legends. Have you not played the game X-Men Legends?
I have, actually.
Have you not owned any of the toy lines from Marvel Legends?
But they're also just like men. Like, they're characters, you relate to them. DC heroes are grander than the men that they are. Like, they have legacies.
They're also more boring, but okay.
Bruce trains with the League, where he reveals to Deckard how his fear of bats sort of led to his parents being murdered. In that there were bats at the opera that they were watching, and Bruce wanted to leave.
But it was a powerful line when Roz told him that it wasn't his fault, but it was his father's. Because Thomas Wayne lacked the will to act to save his family.
And I mean, in a way, Deckard is kind of right. His father didn't act, but you can't really hold that against him. He definitely saw that something was coming up with this like lone figure approaching him and his family. That scene, This is definitely the most powerful Wayne murder scene in any of the films, I think. It just happened so quickly, and the screams and everything, it was heartbreaking.
Yeah, we saw the same scene last year in The Joker, as well as BVS, as well as the Burton films.
We've seen it a number of times, and this is still the best one. In another flashback sequence, we also learned Bruce was robbed of his revenge against Joe Chill by mob boss Carmine Falcone. Bruce disappears from Gotham to travel the world. At the League of Shadows, Bruce has risen through the ranks and learns to overcome his fear, and that the League plans on destroying his home of Gotham City. Bruce destroys the League's training grounds, but saves Deckard before heading back to Gotham.
He also kills Ken Watanabe's character, Ra's al Ghul.
Dude, he doesn't kill him. Like, he pushed him, and then some flaming wood fell on him. Like, that's an act of God.
What caused the building to start falling apart? If I set your house on fire and the ceiling crashes in on you, do you say that the ceiling killed the guy, or do you say that I killed the guy? Exactly.
Dude, shut your mouth. So if I start my car and it backfires and it scares a horse and the horse tramples some people, am I responsible for those people getting trampled?
That's not an apt comparison, because the act of starting a car is not a violent one. It's not the same as setting a building on fire. That is a violent act.
I hate you. So once Bruce gets back in Gotham, he gets re-involved with his family's company, and he gains access to military defense prototype gadgets through Lucius Fox. He also gains an ally in Sergeant James Gordon, who helps Bruce take down Falcone. Now, the scenes of this segment of the film, my favorites are probably like him learning about and using the memory fabric for his cape and carving the batarangs. Like, we have never seen that before in the movies and the comics. It's so cool to see him develop the character of Batman.
Yeah, the reasons why and how Batman is able to do some of the things he's able to do, because it doesn't make sense to be able to glide with just a regular cape like what he's wearing. Although, you know, they did it pretty effectively in BVS, I have to say. BVS, I think they did such a good job of adapting the comic book character to the screen without making you question some of the more fantastical elements.
Yeah, definitely. Another scene that stood out to me was the scene where he first approaches James Gordon under cover of night wearing the ski mask. And now in the comics, Bruce Wayne's first night out to like fight crime was a complete disaster. He ends up getting like stabbed in the leg by a prostitute and just like beat up and stuff like that. So to see him sort of fail and start to learn things like, oh, I should probably have something that helps me jump from building to building, you know, like base jumping, is pretty cool. And to see it tie into like the mythos as a fan, I was really happy with. Eventually, Bruce becomes Batman and he defeats Falcone, only to follow a drug trail that leads him to the next bad guy, Dr. Jonathan Crane, aka Scarecrow, who uses weaponized hallucinogenic gas that Bruce recognizes from his time training with the League of Shadows. Now, the dock scene, where Batman finally takes out Falcone, is one of my favorite Batman scenes on film, period. It's like from a horror film, the way he's taking out the henchmen on the docks.
Yeah, the action isn't great, but conceptually, Batman is so fearsome. Like the way he pulls one of the guys into the shipping crate.
Oh, yeah.
That was amazing.
He's like a force of nature. He's like a shadow that could just appear anywhere, a monster figure. And I love the like, where are you? Here scene. I was like, oh, dang. So when Gordon captures Falcone, he finds Falcone strapped to this like spotlight with his jacket ripped, and that's what inspires the bat signal. That was a pretty cool scene, or the origin of that, you know, Batman staple.
Yeah, great fan service.
As Batman is following the drug trail, another scene that really stood out to me was when he traps Flass and keeps dropping him from the building on that wire, and is like, swear to me.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Such an iconic moment.
And a great realization into how Batman approaches the criminals as a scary individual when they come face to face. Like, it's one thing to be a scary shadow, but it's another thing to have a conversation with a criminal in this bat suit.
Exactly. There's like a lot of planning that has to be involved and theatricality.
Yeah, to instill the maximum amount of fear as possible.
Right. So, of course, when Batman gets to the Narrows, that's when he first meets King Joffrey.
I don't know why he was nice to that kid. He should have known what an asshole he'd grow up to be.
And then he meets Scarecrow. And that was a cool scene, too, where he takes out those bad guys in the apartment.
Yeah, but Scarecrow kind of wiped his ass with Batman there. It was really easy to, like, set him on fire.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. That was a really cool scene. Apparently, the stunt of Batman, like, falling out of a 3-story building on fire was practical. A stuntman really did that.
That's crazy.
And actually, throughout this whole film, like, very little special effects were actually used. It was mostly practical, which I think in its own way was pretty inspiring for a lot of superhero films down the road about making things more real. Lucius Fox develops an antidote for the gas before Bruce learns that Rachel has to go to Arkham Asylum to investigate the sudden psychological breakdown of Falcone. Scarecrow gasses Rachel after she learns that he's poisoning Gotham's water supply. Batman saves Rachel and learns that Scarecrow works for Ra's al Ghul, the next bad guy.
The scene where he takes out the guys in the Arkham basement was a nice precursor to the warehouse scene that we got in BVS.
Yes, yeah.
Like, this reminded me of that a lot. It was just a great scene, especially when he makes Scarecrow gas himself, and Scarecrow's vision of Batman as, like, this scary bat monster guy was so cool.
It was so metal. I loved it.
I love everything about this scene, especially with Scarecrow's idea to call the cops and how Batman's, like, cornered by the cops and uses that cool bat signaling device to call all the bats from the cave to him. Yes. That was amazing. That was from Year One.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah, from Frank Miller's Year One storyline. And it was in a shoe and everything. There are so many great moments in this film like that that I just love. The other Christopher Nolan films didn't have nearly as many fan service moments as this film did. So, right, chased by the police, Batman gets Rachel to his Batcave and administers Fox's antidote. One thing I did think was pretty iffy was during the start of the Tumbler chase scene, how he just, like, drives right over that cop car. Like, those cops could have died.
Yeah, because he drives right over the driver's side of the cop car, you know? He was so rambunctious with the Tumbler. Just such a blatant disregard for property and life, honestly. It was so ridiculous. Like, as cool as the Tumbler is, that Batmobile chase is actually one of my least favorite moments of the film.
What? Really?
Because of all the wanton destruction and all the cheesy cop moments.
I could see that. So again, Batman gets Rachel the antidote in the Batcave. We haven't really talked about the Batcave yet.
So cool. I love everything about the Batcave.
I love how they incorporated like some Underground Railroad history into it. I thought that was really cool. Like, it explained like why there was an elevator down to it and stuff like that. Definitely one of the coolest Batcaves on screen. Back at Wayne Manor during Bruce's birthday party, Ducard reveals himself as Ra's al Ghul, attacking Bruce and burning down Wayne Manor.
That was the best joke of the movie when Bruce tells everybody to get out. I love that. I laugh every single time.
It's not a
He's
joke.
Like, don't laugh. The party's over.
All of you phonies. Such a great delivery.
Yeah.
So Bruce is saved by Alfred, and Batman departs for the Narrows, which is a poor, small island in Gotham City where Arkham Asylum inmates are set loose, and Ra's uses a Wayne Tech Enterprises microwave emitter to disperse the fear toxin from the city's water supply.
Honestly, that's one of the film's major weaknesses, I think. Everything regarding the explanation of this microwave emitter is just so clumsily handled. It almost feels like a late plot point addition, but it can't be because it's so essential. They really hammer home like at least 10 different times exactly what this device does. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, there's a moment earlier on in the film when Mr. Earl's assistant is explaining the disappearance of the microwave emitter, and it's really just a scene of a guy talking, but he's so distressed and the performance is just kind of so panicked, and yet you still don't really care.
What are you introducing here?
Right.
Some kind of microwave beam that evaporates water? Okay. And then they don't really address it again for a few scenes, and so you kind of forget about it, but it was just really clumsy.
It's a very strange, non-cinematic moment of where he's just telling instead of showing. So back in the Narrows, Rachel saves herself and King Joffrey from Scarecrow before Batman saves both from the Arkham inmates, and Bruce reveals his identity to Rachel. Now, as cool as Scarecrow looked on the horse with the straitjacket and everything like that, the way he went out in this film is kind of embarrassing. I understand he kind of had already gone up against Batman and Batman had defeated him, and what more were you going to do with that? But for him just to get tased in the face and then run away, it's all right. That's the end of Scarecrow, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, if you listen to our Mysterio versus Scarecrow duel episode, you'll know that he's much more formidable than that.
And I guess he does pop up in both The Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises, which in itself is kind of interesting. But I do wish he would have had a grander moment, sort of like what Mysterio had in the Spider-Man Far From Home movie. That would have been really cool.
Yeah.
Ra's al Ghul loads the microwave emitter onto Gotham's train system, aiming for Wayne Tower, where the entire city's water supply congregates.
When the train gets here, the water pressure's gonna blow!
I think that guy is Christopher Nolan's uncle, actually.
Oh, really?
And the guy who was with him was actually the lead actor in Christopher Nolan's first film, The Following.
Oh, I had no idea.
But no, yeah, they did repeat that too many times. It's we get it. It all goes to Wayne Tower. We've heard it before. But no, James Gordon blows up the train track, causing the train to derail before it can reach Wayne Tower, saving the day. In the wreckage of Wayne Manor, Rachel confesses her love for the man Bruce was and hopes to be again. Bruce and Alfred make plans to rebuild Wayne Manor with improvements to the Batcave. In the best post-credits setup scene that's not post-credits, Gordon and Batman meet on a rooftop and discuss escalation before Gordon mentions a new criminal who leaves behind Joker playing cards. And that's the end of the film.
Those playing cards were badass. I don't know what it was about the design of them that just really made you anticipate this real-world dark approach to the character.
And they totally delivered on that front in the sequel. I remember the movie theater I was in completely losing their shit when that Joker card was revealed. As did I.
Yeah, that was just a great moment in the theater and really serves to highlight why it is great to see these movies in theaters as opposed to just, getting them straight to video.
So that's the end of the movie. Overall, it was really well made, really well written. The plot structure, I think, again, is one of the most impressive plot structures out of any film, superhero or otherwise, that I've ever seen. It's so efficient in its storytelling that you can't help but love it. It's a near perfect film.
Yeah, really everything about it is amazing, and to claim that anything isn't feels like nitpicking. Because while the film does have its issues, they're so heavily outweighed by the film's strengths that they almost seem irrelevant.
Because of that, and because of how influential this film was, I'm giving it 4.5 stars.
Yeah, out of 5, which is almost a perfect score. I would have to agree. The film delivers on nearly everything that you ever want out of a Batman film, and then some.
And especially an origin film. To date, I still think this is probably the best superhero origin film that has ever been made.
Absolutely. It definitely serves as a high benchmark for the upcoming Matt Reeves Batman film. I really hope that the Robert Pattinson movie doesn't retread too much of the same ground that this movie went over, because essentially this is the perfect telling of Batman's early career.
Right, exactly. And it was so well done. It's like when Marvel decided to introduce Spider-Man, they didn't need to rehash all of the stuff from the Raimi films. So yeah, in the same way, I hope that Matt Reeves doesn't do that with the story elements from this film.
If he tries to redo Christopher Nolan, he's going to end up failing.
I agree. Yeah, 100%. But we'll see. That does it for this review. If you guys want to share your thoughts with us on what you thought of Batman Begins, you could reach out to us via social media on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, or you could email us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com.
Be sure to visit us on our website, dynamicduel.com, where you can find links to all of our social media profiles, as well as listen to episodes of this show, find links to our bonus content that we offer you guys, and find a link to our merchandise store, where we have lots of cool t-shirts and other items for sale with Jonathan's No Prize artwork on them. I don't know if you've seen his No Prize artwork, but it's pretty damn cool. Check out our Instagram if you haven't seen it. Who are you drawing this week for the No Prize, Jonathan?
I will be drawing Ra's al Ghul in lead up to our next episode, which is a duel episode between Ra's al Ghul and the Red Skull.
Yeah, two A-list villains going up against each other, one of Batman's greatest foes versus one of Captain America's greatest foes. The demon's head versus the guy who has a weird head. It's going to be great. Look forward to that next week, guys. Again, don't forget to share, subscribe, rate, and review this show. If you enjoy what you hear, we want to give a huge shout out to our executive producers of the show, Jace Crump, John Spees, and Bodo Winter. And that does it for this episode, guys. We'll talk to you next week.
Up and away.
True believers.